What's going on, guys? This is your boy KRYPTONIAN saying here, bringing you guys another Demon Slayer video, and this one's going to be explaining every single form that Muzan had, as well as their powers and relevant backstories where they apply. Obviously, if you're an anime-only fan, this video will contain spoilers, so you have been warned. As we all know, part of what makes Muzan so much of a headache to deal with is the fact that he's changing bodies faster than Orochimaru snatches up children and Naruto to run experiments on. Depending on what form that Muzan takes, there are pros and cons to it, but the interesting thing about all of this is that Muzan didn't always start out as a body-changing bad guy. In truth, he started out as a human. Before he was born, Muzan found himself fighting just to exist. Because while he was inside of his mother's womb, his heart stopped beating several times. As he said himself, he felt the shadow of death always clinging to his body, and when he finally did make it into the world, death had such a tight grip on him that everyone thought he was dead, which led to preparations being made to cremate his body. But before they could cremate him, Muzan finally cried and gave proof of life. Now, you'll probably be thinking to yourself, if only he was cremated, so many terrible things would have never happened. Like that cutscene from Deadpool 2 where Deadpool kills a baby Hitler for the greater good of humanity. However, there was no Deadpool to kill a baby Muzan and toss him into the fire, much to the dismay of Tanjiro's family some 1,000 years later. Muzan had once again survived death, but he didn't do so unscathed as a human. His life would be far from easy, with him being a sickly child who combated illnesses left and right. He lived, but he lived a life of suffering, and as we all know, suffering can turn a person inward to look at their own soul in order to find the goodness inside of their soul, or find the inner demon inside of them that they kept locked away. For Muzan, it's a little more of the latter. All those experiences made him wary of any type of illness, and he was scared of death, which makes sense given everything he's been through from the time he was inside his mother's womb until then. But while he was a human, he was told he'd die before he reached 20 years old. This fear of dying can be viewed as the catalyst for what pushed him towards taking the experimental medicines that the doctor gave him, and due to his own uncertainty and impatience to see if the drugs were working or not, Muzan killed the doctor, and it will be after that he would gain the extremely healthy and strong body, a body much stronger than it should have been humanly possible. But this power came at a terrible price. Muzan was required to regularly consume humans in order to maintain his body, and that was both a healthy and strong body, but giving him a way to also avoid illnesses that he feared, as well as a way to fight off of death. But it came at the expense of his moral humanity due to him needing to consume humans, which in turn turned him into a figurative monster. Muzan's next form continues to spiral, but as we see often in the anime, the actions of one tend to have ramifications on others. The Ubuyashiki family would wind up being cursed in response to Muzan losing his humanity and becoming a demon, effectively tying the clan's future to the destiny of Muzan. However, the Ubuyashiki family wasn't the only one with a bit of an issue. Whereas they were cursed with a short lifespan and frail bodies, Muzan found that the cost of his demon form was that he couldn't go out into the sunlight, and the restrictions left him totally enraged, which in a way is a bit of poetic irony when he was inside of his mother's womb, existing in the darkness, having his heart stopped by death so often, and when he was pronounced dead at birth and about to be cremated, he fought off death by crying to prove he was alive. However, now that he seemingly found a way to escape death, the demon form would send him to death if he stepped out of the sunlight, and the flames would burn him into the ashes, just like the cremation should have burned him into the ashes. The irony in this is that Muzan killed the doctor, who in theory would have been able to finish his treatment by giving him the blue spider lily, which is continuing that theme that Muzan's actions have impacts on the lives of others, because the demons who served under him would suffer the exact same fate as well. If they go out into the sun, then they get burned by ashes. Muzan would shift his focus towards trying to absorb another demon with immunity towards the sunlight, like he tried to do with Nezuko later on in the story, which we all know how that worked out for him, or he would try and look for the blue spider lily. Either one of those would allow him to go out into the sun. Instead of just eating humans to sustain himself, he didn't hesitate to turn humans into demons, partly in the hopes that they could find the blue spider lily for him, or in the hopes that they would become immune to the sunlight and he'd be able to absorb them. But again, this is Muzan with a little bit of Parker luck, where essentially the problems he's making for himself are all his own fault, because this line of thinking would place Tanjiro down the path of eventually becoming the demon slayer who took him down. All that time operating into the shadows at night, growing stronger and more used to his demon form, would inevitably lead fate to place him in the crosshairs of Yoruichi, and as the expression goes, he quickly fucked around and found out when it came to Yoruichi, because this wasn't any regular demon slayer that he'd come across, because Yoruichi was strong enough to almost kill Muzan during their battle, and this was enough to push Muzan into hiding, to send out the other demons to carry out his will form, as well as to take preventive measures as a safeguard in case another demon slayer with the potential and the power of Yoruichi showed up. If one did, he has several buffers between himself and them. Muzan's adult form, better known as the Michael Jackson form, is the one that we see him in most often in the series, and in my opinion, it's the best looking one, but don't let these attractive features fool you. He's still very much a savage, with it being explained in the Demon Slayer data book that Muzan went as far as to kill the husband of his wife, getting close to her due to her family being wealthy and influential, and using her as a cover so he could go out at night without arousing any suspicion while he did so. Throughout his entire lifetime, Muzan would go on to have 5 different wives to maintain his cover, and he was so cruel to them that each of them ended up killing themselves before it was all said and done because of how cruel Muzan was. Muzan can also take on the appearance of a woman, as we see him do when he addresses the lower moons when they gathered before him. For this form, while its appearance does have that of a pale-skinned and docile woman, don't let that fool you, because Muzan's power is very much still ferocious, with them being able to slaughter the lower moons without hardly any issues. Muzan's next form is that of a young boy, and he uses his cover to stay inside and read, likely looking for information that could point him into the direction of the Blue Spider Lily's location, which is again Muzan trying to run away from death, which is symbolic given his story so far. The only other thing that we see here is that Muzan is once again using his ability to shapeshift to place himself in a life of status and luxury, giving him a perfect cover as he hides from the demon slayers and allows his followers to work for him. The family who he stayed with were wealthy and affluent, much like the wife and child he had when he ran into Tanjiro early on in the story. When you think about it, this is actually very brilliant, and I'll explain to you why. Because with each of these forms, he's hiding in plain sight in the last places that any of the Demon Slayer would ever think to look for him, which allows him to practice one of the laws from the 48 Laws of Power, which is to control all the options, which he's essentially doing by making it so hard to locate him and stay in hiding until the time came for him to step out of the shadows to make his final move towards escaping death, which saw him transform back into his adult form and head to the Demon Slayer mansion, hoping to strike a death blow, only to be caught in an explosion that was set up for him. This leads to Muzan transforming into yet another form with the demonic mouths all over his limbs and several tendrils on his body as well, which would aid him in his fighting style that could be used to keep the Demon Slayer Hashira, who he was fighting against, at a distance and make it a battle of attrition, where he was hoping to wear them down until their human bodies reached their breaking points, or he was able to land a blow on them that would allow him to use his blood demon art in order to take out the Hashira. What's interesting about the color of his hair is that when you look at Buddhism, the color white signifies death, and in Japan, for samurai, white was also associated with the samurai ritual of suicide, and staying in Japan, in Shinto religion, the color white is closely linked to the spirit world, with the color white at times being used for funerals and for mourning, which goes back to how we were first introduced to the Muzan at the start of the video. He was someone who always had a connection to death, and the spirit world is a place you go to after death, and it's fitting now that in his final form, this would be where Muzan meets his end, and Muzan just happens to have white hair. What's even more ironic is that Muzan spent all this time running from death, and it's thanks to Tamio that he's actually running closer to death the longer that his fight wore on, and it wasn't because Tanjiro had used the ancestral methods in order to learn the 13th form of sun breathing. Instead, Tamio's medicine that she injected into him was aging the cells inside of his body as the fight wore on, and that medicine regen power wasn't something he could rely on, because as the wounds from his battle with Yoruichi began to pop up, the Demon Slayers were able to target the correct places and go after his vital points. Sticking with the theme of death and how it was associated with him before he was even born, Muzan in his final moments made a giant flesh baby in order to block out the sunlight while he tried to escape, only this time he wasn't able to escape death, which brings him full circle. However, that's going to be it for this Demon Slayer video on the brilliance of every Muzan form explained. Let me know which one of those is your favorite, and while you think that over, consider checking out these other videos you see on the screen right now.